Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering for you today. With hundreds of thousands of kids having received the CCP virus vaccine, a significant number of parents remain concerned about the vaccine safety and will not be getting the shot for their kids. With the recent approval of the Pfizer vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11, Texas Senator Ted Cruz introduces legislation to prevent public schools and the federal government from imposing vaccine mandates on children. We also speak with Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries, to get his take. And Speaker Pelosi led a group of Democrats to speak at the United Nations Climate Summit. They're assuring other nations they'll make good on their climate promises as another battle in Congress shapes up to pass Biden's next spending bill. Vaccine mandate protests continue nationwide as stricter mandate policies are getting rolled out. Hundreds of protesters gathered Monday near the Los Angeles City Hall, opposing vaccine mandates for city and county workers. The group of firefighters who hosted this event say such mandates are unconstitutional. Starting from Monday in Los Angeles, customers are required to show proof of vaccination in restaurants, shopping malls, theaters, and hair salons. Violators will be fined by the city. The Epoch Times reports a nationwide strike against vaccine mandates is taking place from November 8th to the 11th. According to the organizer, the walkouts involve people from various industries and backgrounds. On Saturday, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit blocked the Biden administration's private employer CCP virus vaccine mandate, asserting there may be constitutional issues with the requirement. The case was brought by multiple entities and several states, including Texas, Utah, and Mississippi. The CCP virus is the virus which causes COVID-19. And according to data from the CDC, more than 360,000 kids under the age of 12 have gotten at least one dose of the CCP virus vaccine. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra and Education Secretary Miguel Cardona sent a letter on Monday to school superintendents and elementary school principals, urging them to host vaccination clinics. Meanwhile, First Lady Jill Biden visited a Virginia elementary school to kick off the vaccine campaign. A significant number of parents remain concerned about vaccine safety. Recent polls have shown that among parents of children under the age of 12, about 30% of these parents will not be vaccinating their children. And the Richmond, Virginia School Board reversed course on disciplining unvaccinated teachers this Monday. Due to vacancies and a large number of resignations, the school board voted not to discipline unvaccinated teachers. The vote does not reverse the mandate, but leaves a question on how it will be enforced. And Republican Senator Ted Cruz introduced a bill last week to prohibit mandating vaccination on children. Cruz tweeted on Tuesday, "It should be the choice of parents, not the government forcing you to inject your kids with an experimental vaccine." With the prospects of a federal vaccine mandate for children lurking in the horizon, earlier today we spoke to President of Summit Ministries, Jeff Myers, to get some perspective. Here's what he had to say. Jeff Myers, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks, Steve.
Now, being involved in the faith community, I want to ask you about some of these vaccine mandates. Are people successfully finding religious exemptions?
Steve, it's really mixed. There are a lot of people claiming religious exemptions. Corporations do not necessarily have to follow those. The government does have to follow them because of our Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which says that that the government must choose the least restrictive means to achieve its policy outcomes. And that holds true, even if there is an emergency issue or pandemic. So what the courts will end up ruling is going to be interesting. But to me, Steve, there's a bigger issue, and it's not just whether people can get religious exemptions. It's whether or not these mandates actually violate the very principle of religious freedom that's enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution.
Now, I want to ask you about the vaccine mandates for children. The city of San Francisco will soon be requiring vaccine passports for children as young as 5. The mayor of New York has said he would like to go this route as well. But there is also a lot of opposition from parents, many of whom actually support the vaccines for adults. Why is there such resistance when it comes to the vaccines for children?
Well, Steve, this is the first time in history that I'm aware of that a vaccine mandate is being forced on children, not because they are susceptible to the disease. They are not, by and large, but because the 60-somethings, 70-somethings, and 80-somethings who control large pharmacy corporations, who give political contributions, who hold office, and so forth, are demanding that they be protected from the children. If you take a look back at, say, the measles vaccine in 1963, before the measles vaccine, 2.8 million children died every year from measles around the world. This was a disease that directly threatened those, especially those who were under the age of 5. The measles vaccine came along, parents accepted that, and the number of cases of measles is very, very low. There were about 140,000 measles deaths worldwide in this last year. Now, take COVID as a counterexample. The total number of 5 to 18-year-olds in the United States of America from January 1st, 2020 to the end of October of this year was 474. That's the total. So we're asking parents to give an experimental vaccine to their children when there's almost no evidence at all that the children are at risk of this disease, but the older people who want to be protected. So it's just another example of forcing children into a situation of being the shield behind which a lot of political operatives want to hide.
Jeff Myers, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
President Biden visited the Port of Baltimore today. The administration is highlighting the newly passed infrastructure deal, and the White House has announced new policy in an attempt to remedy the supply chain crisis. The Biden administration is prioritizing possible upgrades to key U.S. ports within 90 days as part of a $3.5 billion investment. The Department of Transportation would also allow port authorities to redirect any leftover money to address the supply chain crisis. Last Friday, Congress passed the $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan, which includes $17 billion to improve ports. Biden has not yet signed the bill into law. The White House is planning a bill signing ceremony next week when Congress returns. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this week led a congressional delegation to speak at the United Nations Climate Summit. Several House Democrats joined her. They say Biden's social welfare and climate spending bill is necessary to fight what they call a climate crisis. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports for us. Melina, what's the Democrats' message to the world at this conference?
Steve, these Democrat lawmakers who attended this UN Climate Summit sent a message that America is going to get it done. They're pretty confident that that Build Back Better plan will pass. Now, although this bill has shrunk a little bit, still a large portion of it is dedicated to those climate programs. And we heard from a strong climate advocate in the House, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's essentially the face of the Green New Deal. She assured these other nations that America is a changed nation.
We're not just back. We're different, and we are more just.
So the Democrats got one of their spending bills passed with nominal bipartisan support, but the majority of Democrats, including President Biden, say that this bill falls short of their ambitions, specifically with regard to their climate agenda. They're now trying to push the second spending bill with a substantial amount of funding for climate projects. Pelosi herself said at the UN Climate Summit this week that they'll deliver. Let's have a listen.
We have a goal, we have a timetable, we have milestones. And what our purpose is in our legislation to reach those milestones, whether it's by 2030 for 50%.
So, Melina, does it look like they're going to make quick progress on this once Congress is back in session?
Well, there's a couple of factors to consider here. So if that Congressional Budget Office report isn't there and officially out, but by next week when Pelosi intends to hold this vote, it could delay it a little bit. This is because some House moderates, Democrats, actually are the reason why this vote was delayed last week, because they said they wanted to see the Congressional Budget Office report first, just to make sure and verify all of the spending numbers with the White House and with the Congressional Budget Office report. All of those numbers add up. And also another question to consider is, will all 50 Democrats and the Senate vote to pass this. Steve?
And with Pelosi pushing the climate agenda at the UN summit this week, calling climate a national security issue, what exactly do you think she meant?
Well, Steve, one reason why Speaker Pelosi might have said this is because right now we do depend a little more on other nations to provide and import oil. Now, this is after the Biden administration implemented a slew of policies to crack down on U.S. producers of oil and gas here in America. Now, the question is, will America be able to be energy independent if we move more towards clean energy? Now, the answer to that would be not right away, and this is for many reasons, but one reason is because it's not too easy to mine for rare earth minerals here in the U.S., and these minerals are what's used to make solar panels. And some are concerned that if we do quickly implement this clean energy agenda, will make us move from relying on some countries for oil and gas to then relying on other countries like China for the rare earth minerals and the solar panels, since China does dominate that clean energy, that market for clean energy products. The solution to that would be to make it easier to mine for those rare earth minerals in the U.S., but there's no word on Capitol Hill that they're working towards doing that. Now, we have talked to some lawmakers here who say that the solution they propose to this problem is maybe moving U.S. investors more towards the clean energy industry, getting investors to invest more in that industry. That way they can promote and push forward their climate agenda while at the same time pushing for energy independence. Steve?
Melina Wisecup reporting. And coming up, Thursday is Veterans Day. Americans will honor all those who have served in the armed forces and defended the nation. And this year, at more than 90 special naturalization ceremonies, roughly 4,500 members of military and their families will become U.S. citizens. And with Veterans Day upon us, we had a unique opportunity to chat with a U.S. Army veteran who also happened to design the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. And producer price increases matched the highest annual rise on record since 2008, only adding more fuel to the inflation concerns. Welcome back. Each year on November 11th, Americans honor all those who have served in the United States military and that have defended the nation. Citizenship and Immigration Services honors Veterans Day this year by holding more than 90 special naturalization ceremonies. Over 4,000 current and former members of the military and their families will become U.S. citizens. At a ceremony in Maryland on Tuesday, the director of the USCIS presented retired Major General Viet Xuan Loong with the Outstanding Americans by Choice Award. Loong is a native of Vietnam who fled the communist country with his family at a young age. He had a distinguished career in the United States military and recently retired after 34 years of service. Veterans Day is a day to reflect and honor those who have served our great nation, defending our country from threats of terrorism, communism, and all forms of tyranny and oppression. We were honored to speak with our next guest, who not only defended our country in the United States Army, but is also a visionary artist who also happened to design, construct, and build the Korean War Monument in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of the fantastic book, Mosaic. Here's our interview with Lewis Nelson. Lewis Nelson, thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, Lewis, I'd like to ask you about your book, Mosaic, but first, I want to get your thoughts on the Korean War and what this war meant to you, means to you, and if there's anything about this war in particular that you'd like people to know about that might not be well known.
I have a very personal sense about this war, and it shifts somewhat as I start to think more about it. When I went into high school, the Korean War was happening. And I tell you, it was a long, this is 1950 to 1953. That's 5 years after the World War II. The United States is kind of building up and to be reinvigorated from being in a war economy. Everybody's happy, the economy is getting better, people are traveling and so forth. Their mind is not on international events, as far as I could tell. I certainly wasn't my family. Nobody, I don't think my folks mentioned Korea to me. I couldn't remember it, but it happened. And because of the Korean War, I said, you know, I joined ROTC to save that I wouldn't be interrupted by a draft. You know, I excelled there. I was accepted a regular Army commission, became a helicopter pilot. All kinds of curious things happened because of the Korean War.
Excellent. Now, there's an interesting thing about your book. It's named Mosaic, but the subtitle is what piques my curiosity. Mosaic, War Monument Mystery. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I call it Mosaic because it eventually turns out to be a number of different things. And because of what I thought about Korea, and because of my neighbors, being Vietnam and Lincoln and Washington. those are the three principal wars, other than World War II, that became my neighbors. And then I had to think what I was going to do on my portion of the work so that it would not just be different than the others, but allude to the others as well, and to build on the others, so that there's a full round picture of things, of not just a leader and a figure or those that died, but to those who served.
What does Veterans Day mean to you, and what do you think that people should be thinking about on this day?
When my wife and I approached the memorial in 1995, when it was being dedicated, it was the first time I had seen it, and I had tears in my eyes. And I realized at that time this wasn't my memorial anymore. It was their memorial. It belonged to the veterans. And one guy who was probably older than me kind of ran up. For some reason, he knew me for some reason. And he said, he thanked me. He was just out of his world thanking. He said, if it weren't for this, and if it weren't for what you did, I wouldn't know what I had done. And I can now talk about this. I can tell other people about it.
Now let me ask you, how did your time in the military impact your work?
I spent about almost 5 years in the military. No one asked me why I spent that amount of time, but I tell you, it was one of the most important periods of time in my life. I learned how to lead. I learned what was important and how to make decisions. And probably the first thing I learned to do is to make the decision. Make a decision, make it then and there. You can always move it, change it or something, but you have to make a decision.
Now, throughout the process, was there any collaboration with the Pentagon or military officials when you were coming up with the design?
Well, the advisory board was composed of about 7 or 8 retired colonels and 2 4-star generals. And I became very close to General Stilwell, who was an Army 4-star general. And I presented a number of different directions, but they all had to do with faces and different kinds of characteristics. And I won't get into the characteristics. And he said, let's just have faces. Just have faces. And you can put a hat on them, so that would help. Or if you need to put something into a hand and so forth. But you only need to just have faces. Nothing else.
Lewis Nelson, thank you.
Thank you.
The Biden administration is reviewing shutting down a key pipeline in Michigan in the face of widespread opposition and surging energy prices. A White House spokeswoman confirmed that they are studying its potential environmental impact. Monday, White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre disputed reports that the Biden administration was going to terminate Enbridge Inc.'s Line 5 pipeline. However, she conceded that the federal government was reviewing the matter.
So any reporting indicating that some decision has been made, again, is not accurate. The Army Corps of Engineers is preparing an environmental impact to look through this.
Tuesday, Congressman Jim Jordan told Fox and Friends that considering another pipeline shutdown makes no sense.
What do these guys want? $8 gas? It's like they're intentionally trying to harm American families and American workers, and I don't get it.
Line 5 is part of a pipeline network that moves crude oil and other petroleum-based products from Canada to Michigan, transporting some 500,000 barrels per day. Politico reported that the administration was weighing the potential market effects of a shutdown of the pipeline in spite of widespread opposition. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, former Democratic governor of Michigan, told CNN that winter energy prices would increase for most Americans.
It will be more expensive this year than last year.
13 GOP lawmakers sent a letter to President Biden last week, warning that the move would cause gas prices to further increase amidst already high prices. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo will embark on her first official visit to Asia next week, but her trip will not include a stop to China. Secretary Raimondo will travel to Japan, Singapore, and Malaysia for a 4-day visit from November 15th through the 18th. During a virtual summit last month, President Biden pledged up to $102 million for the partnership between the U.S. and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. To promote the initiative, Raimondo said in a statement that it's important to build alliances with like-minded partners and to jumpstart a regional economic framework. Her trip will also focus on building a secure supply chain and on cooperation in the digital economy. U.S. producer prices increased solidly in October, driven by surging fuel costs and strong auto sales. It suggests that the high inflation could persist amid tight global supply chains. According to the Department of Labor, producer prices rose over 8% in the last 12 months, the highest since 2008. This reinforced broader concerns about inflation, as higher production costs tend to trickle down to consumers. Also, wholesale prices in the U.S. surged again in October, with gasoline and vegetables as the main boosters. Since January, wholesale prices have substantially climbed month over month. Congress has created a new requirement for automakers: find a creative way to keep drunk drivers from operating vehicles while intoxicated. Under the new legislation, monitoring systems to stop intoxicated drivers would roll out in all new vehicles as early as 2026. The Transportation Department will assess the best form of technology to install in millions of vehicles and to make sure automakers are given adequate time to comply. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you next time.